Meet Lee Cowan and American Picker as they look for diamonds in the rough. If we find the base, it's in good shape and worth $1.50. Okay. During his time on American Pickers, Frank Fritz did a lot more than just look for old things. In a way, it showed how complicated success, personal problems, and friendship can be. Mike Wolf and Frank Fritz were the show's main characters. Their sincere friendship and shared love of antiques brought the show to life. Their different personalities and ways of doing things went well together, which made their exchanges on screen both fun and real. But as the saying goes, everything good has to end. How did the choice to break up with Frank Fritz come about? What will Frank Fritz do next now that he's done with American Pickers? Come with us as we look at the scene that caused American Pickers to cancel Frank Fritz, the first episode of the show. You can't just watch American Pickers like any other reality show. The story is about a talented person who finds lost treasures and takes us on an exciting trip into the world of antiquities. Who was in charge of the show? Mike Wolf, Frank Fritz, and Danielle Cushman. Danielle Cushman, the force behind the scenes, was a key part of making sure that every pick worked out. Her lively nature and deep understanding of the picking business gave the story of the show more depth. But behind the scenes, the stress of being famous started to get to Frank in particular. He was under a lot of stress because of his busy filming schedule, the constant attention from fans, and the loss of privacy. For someone who normally liked to be alone, reality TV put him in situations where he felt uncomfortable and made people question his morals. How can we keep the show's integrity and credibility while dealing with the fallout from? What effect will his move to leave have on the rest of the team? Look at the video again to learn more. Under the jokes and arguments on TV, the real problems people face in relationships, with fame, and with their own lives are hidden. People were interested in one of the side stories because Frank Fritz was missing in action. A lot of attention is paid to the events and factors that led to this important event in this movie. The idea for American Pickers came from a new way of looking at the old saying, "One man's trash is another man's treasure." There was more to this than a talk. With the goal of finding historical items that were worth money, the trip went into empty barns, falling apart attics, and dusty basements all over the country. People who watched got a glimpse into the nostalgic world of antique picking, which is the skill of looking through old things that most people would pass over and finding the ones that might be worth something. Wolf and Fritz go through people's homes, barns, sheds, garages, and other places where items of history and collectibles are kept. They ask people who are serious or casual collectors, hoarders, or who have received too many things that they don't know what to do with to help them. Wolf has been picking since he was 4 years old. He likes old motorbikes, air-cooled Volkswagens, bicycles, and penny farthings. Fritz, on the other hand, likes old toys, oil cans, and Hondas, especially things that have to do with peanuts. They've bought old commercials and ads, movie posters, a Piaggio ape, and a rare 15-gallon petrol pump that can be seen, which a friend said is likely the only one in North America of its kind. In December 2011, American Pickers reported that Antique Archaeology had rented part of a Nashville factory that used to make cars in 1914, the Marathon, as a second location for their business so they wouldn't have to travel as far to bring their finds from the southern states. Michael Wolf and Frank Fritz were the most important characters on the show. The on-screen friendship, the fact that they knew a lot about different kinds of antiques, and the excitement of the quest kept people watching. The real relationship they had, on the other hand, was without a doubt the most interesting thing. Like many reality TV characters, Mike and Frank were not made up by a casting agent. There was a friendship between them that went back to school, which created a real foundation for how they interacted on TV. Frank was more realistic, and Mike's keen eye for jewelry and positive attitude went well with it. This made for an interesting relationship between the two of them. If you compare Frank to Mike, who was more interested in the historical stories around the antiques, Frank knew that they could be used to make money. Their banter struck a chord with the crowd, which was sometimes funny and sometimes angry. Because of this, they got their backing. It showed a true picture of friendships where differences in personality and ideas don't get in the way of the friendship in any way. Danielle Cushman was one of the people who chose the people who were chosen. She was the force behind the scenes who made sure everything ran smoothly. She was responsible for scouting areas as part of her job, getting in touch with potential leads and planning the details of each pick. Danielle added a new and exciting vibe to the event with her lively personality, tattooed look, and deep knowledge of the picking business. Her job was to connect the viewers with the picking world, and she often gave viewers information and insights that made the stories in each show more interesting. She did a lot more than just help Mike and Frank plan their trips. She was an important part of the American Pickers team, showing how important it is to do study and make connections in order to win any selection. Danielle's participation was very important. She was very important to the group. The show's idea was a nice change from the usual stories on reality TV. Travel, work, and history were all a part of its structure. In each show, Mike and Frank went out into the vast American countryside, knocked on doors, and went through piles of junk that most people would consider useless. It was still interesting to find stories about both the things themselves and the people who owned them among the piles. These stories painted a vivid picture of American past, from the country's industrial roots to the hardships people faced during wars. Ups and downs in the economy and big changes in culture. Also, as the show went on, American Pickers did more than just make people laugh. In addition, it taught them things and made them remember a simpler time. Not only did it make people feel nostalgic, but it also made them realize how important it is to keep history alive, and not just in books or museums, but also in everyday things that had meaning in someone's life in the past. The speaker stressed that worth is more than just monetary value. It also includes culture value, historical value, and emotional value. Because of this, American Pickers was able to make a name for itself by using the perfect mix of interesting hosts, deep stories, and the draw of hidden gems. Because of this, the show was able to turn antique hunts into primetime TV, easing the stresses of reality TV. There were times when the crew had to start work as early as 3:30 or 4 a.m., but most days they worked up to 18 hours. Because this routine was always the same, there wasn't much time for personal reflection or relaxation. The fact that he had to stay at different hotels in different places almost every night because he was traveling made me tired. It was especially hard for Frank to deal with all of this extra attention. His natural need for alone time seemed to be at odds with the way the show seemed to be going. People who went to the famous event known as Fry Fest in 2012 said it was too much for them to handle. It's getting harder for a lot of people to tell the difference between personal space and being known in public. Receiving kindness and praise from fans was definitely satisfying, but the constant attention and lack of privacy began to wear thin on the person. Fame also brought attention to more private events. Every single move, choice, and mistake was looked at very carefully. The effects of this encounter began to show up in his body. His disappearance from social media sites like Twitter and Instagram was a sign that he was trying to get back some personal space. This was done in a world where his viewers and followers were scrutinizing every aspect of his life and power. In contrast to what you might think, Frank's private character seems to be based on his personality, not on how popular he is. From what he said, being famous is not something he wants to do in the long run. In a strange twist, a guy looking for money in the past got a lot of attention from people in the present. Frank always talked about the idea of going back to a simpler life where he was just Frank when the show finished. This was clear from the fact that he had lived in the same house for 25 years and was very attached to his 1986 Ford Ranger. But Frank wasn't the only one who had problems with living in the spotlight. The whole group of American Pickers had to deal with the problems that come with being famous. Because they had so many fans, they were recognized almost everywhere. This led to interruptions during shoots, random meetings, and sometimes awkward situations. Finally, the reality TV model has its own rules, no matter how exciting it seems. There aren't many lines between private and public in this world, which makes it hard to stay balanced. According to Fritz, his time on American Pickers shows how contradictory reality TV can be. It can bring you fame, honor, and the chance to follow your dreams, but it also takes away your privacy, mental health, and personal space. In Frank Fritz's experiences on American Pickers, there are usually both times of great success and times of very bad luck. For Frank Fritz, the legal problems he was having were a major low point in his public life. There were a lot of ways that these events showed how hard it is to be watched all the time and what happens when that happens. One of the first legal ruins that was written down was caused by traffic violations. For the average person, driving violations might not seem like a big deal. But for someone as famous as Frank, they quickly became newsworthy and a source of debate for both fans and opponents. The violations, which included things like speeding and having an unusually registered car, showed a person who might have had the same issues following the rules in his personal life as he did with those set by famous people. However, the DUI charge became the most talked about part of Frank's court case. Unfortunately, this story made people think that famous people could fall for certain scams and live dangerous lives. Frank's stated blood alcohol level was much higher than the legal limit. This put his own life and the lives of other drivers in danger. There were heated arguments and discussions about the event in public places. Some were upset, while others felt bad for the guy they had grown to love on American Pickers and said they were worried about him. The DUI incident wasn't just one time. Instead, it set off a chain reaction that led to more questions and more attention. As the media dug deeper, more serious claims and stories came up. The story that came out was difficult. It was about a man who was struggling with inner demons and the suffocating pressures of success. The differences between the stories that came up were especially interesting. Different versions gave varying levels of detail about Frank's actions and intentions. Some said it was just one bad decision, while others said it was part of a trend of careless behavior. The truth seemed to be hidden in a cloud of assumptions, interpretations, and half-truths, as is often the case in these kinds of settings. Frank's problems with the law. Frank's defense, on the other hand, was based on sorrow and understanding. Close friends and family of Frank and his law team worked hard to stress that he was human and had times when he was weak. They talked about the stress he was under and how the constant attention was hurting his mental and emotional health. Even though getting a DUI was bad, they thought it was more of a cry for help than anything else. The legal problems Frank Fritz was having brought to light a problem that happens way too often in the world of fame. From one side, the rough waves of fame were making it hard for a weak and fragile person. On the other side were the needs and criticisms of a society that constantly flips between admiration and contempt. The episodes showed how hard it is to live a life in the spotlight and how complicated it is for choices to affect how other people feel. Problems in relationships, and the fireworks show that Frank was having a hard time inside. After what was called the firework incident, his life, which had always been full of thrills and old things, took a turn he didn't expect. Together, this episode and his troubled relationship with Diane were a sobering warning that some things, like old things, get better with age, but some things in human history may leave wounds that never fully heal. Frank and Diane's relationship was a patchwork of emotion, fights, and times when they were both very happy and very sad. Their link was old, with flaws and beauty, just like the things Frank was always looking for, but there were tense feelings beneath the surface. This is the background of the fireworks show, which happened on a happy evening and turned dangerous when a firecracker was handled carelessly, causing major damage to property and minor injuries to people who were there. Frank's image will never be the same again because of how quickly and widely the situation spread. The details of the event began to get a lot of attention from the news. People said that the fireworks were meant to light up the sky, but they instead set nearby objects on fire, making the fire hard to put out. Lots of people were thinking that Frank's carelessness was what caused the trouble. The fact that this happened in front of close family and friends added fuel to the fire of doubt. Diane felt the effects of what happened more than anyone else. People who saw her look during the time when the flames were jumping and dancing said it was one of complete fear and confusion. Their relationship, which was already weak, got even weaker after this tragedy. They fought over who was to blame and accused each other of not being careful, which made their once beautiful link look dark. There were close eyes on Diane's place. The first thing she did was watch out for Frank and keep him safe from the mean things people said. With that said, the stress became much more clear as the days turned into weeks. It became harder and harder for them to be seen in public, and when they did go out together, there wasn't the same obvious link as there had been before. There were rumors that Frank was about to break up with his girlfriend, which added to the story that his personal life was getting worse. The real reason why Frank was put in jail. As a reality star, Frank Fritz seems to be used to being well-known and famous. He was a co-host on the history show American Pickers until not long ago. He and his partner Mike Wolf went around the back roads of the United States looking for strange old things to sell. When Picker first aired in 2010, it became a cult favorite. Fitz, on the other hand, gained a loyal fan base thanks to his silly love of cans and happy personality. Fans were naturally confused and angry when Frank stopped appearing on the show after a fight with Wolf. Fitz has been having a hard time lately with his health and a drug disorder. The fight is interesting for the tabloids, but Fitz's problems go back even further. Until he was caught in 2017. This is how the host of American Pickers broke the law in the middle of Iowa. The news station WQAD says that Frank Fitz was caught in 2017 for driving on an Iowa interstate the wrong way. His plea to having been drunk before getting in the car led to his arrest for OY. In the end, the American Pickers co-host pleaded guilty and agreed to the court's rules. Fitz had to pay a fine, finish a year of probation, and go through any treatment that was suggested, such as a program to evaluate his drug use. Because of this and the fact that his family had a past of drinking too much, the reality star went to a rehab center to get help. Frank's participation was affected by his health. The fireworks show not only made sparks, but it also made people talk about their own responsibilities, how fragile relationships can be when people are watching, and what it costs to be famous. But it turned out to be a turning point in Frank's life, a part of it that he would always have to think about. Thinking that this one event was the only reason why Frank and Diane's relationship ended up being tense would be oversimplifying things. There is no doubt, though, that it played a part in how the bond grew. It looked like the pressure, which came from both inside and outside, was opening up cracks that were already there, expanding them and making them stand out more. Frank Fritz's life as a whole shows how fragile public opinion can be and how unpredictable human relationships can be. The fireworks show and its effects are a depressing reminder of this. It was through the smoke and ashes of that terrible night that a story of love, sadness, and hard lessons learnt came to light. It's almost impossible to overstate how much Frank's health affects his ability to work on the projects he's interested in. In every episode of American Pickers, Frank Fritz showed off his great eye for antiques and his contagious joy about the process. Despite this, Frank was dealing with a personal problem behind the scenes that had a big effect on both his personal life and how well he did on the show. He was still having trouble with this issue because he has Crohn's disease. The inflammatory gut disease that Frank had for a long time, called Crohn's disease, made his life difficult in many ways, both physically and emotionally. There are times when the condition goes away and times when it hurts unbearably, which is what makes it so notoriously unexpected. Frank had a lot more trouble dealing with this illness because he was famous. Over the years, his weight has changed. He hasn't always been at shows, and over time, his energy level has changed. All of these changes have been seen by fans. The sickness did not just show up on the outside, though it also caused other problems for people who had it. When Frank took the medicines for his Crohn's disease, they did help with some of his symptoms, but they also caused a lot of bad side effects. Changes in his hunger, mood, and ability to sleep were a few of them. All of these things made his already difficult work even more difficult. Many people were inspired to get better because Frank was honest about his illness. Through his frank talks about having Crohn's disease, he helped other people who had it by making the illness less mysterious for a wider audience. He turned out to be a bright light that showed people that they could still be passionate about what they loved, in spite of the problems that came up because of the situation. Over the course of the seasons, Frank's determination to take care of himself became clearer. He wasn't shy about talking about how often he went to the doctor, how important it was to get enough rest, and the changes he made to his food. Another important goal for him was to get the word out to everyone about how important early diagnosis and intervention are. Because of these changes, the presentation became different, even though they were necessary for his better health. Thanks to the reflective breaks that were used to split episodes, the story went from being a surface-level look at antique collecting to a deeper look at how strong people are. During these breaks, Frank would talk about what he had learned from his trips, what Frank left behind as time went on. The bond that formed between Frank and his co-stars, especially Mike Wolf, became stronger. The fact that Mike cared about Frank's health and that they occasionally joked around about his illness showed how close they were. These two things showed that they were friends. Frank Fritz finally came out in July 2021 and broke his quiet. He said he was leaving the reality TV show that made him famous. Fritz told The Sun in an interview that he didn't really leave American Pickers, but that he stopped being in the new shows. I know it sounds like those two things are the same, but they're not quite. Fritz can tell you more. He also said that he didn't leave the show and that it was up to the network to decide if he would come back. After I was done shooting, I had some back surgery and then the pandemic hit. Why did Danielle quit the American Pickers? As soon as the star said she was on bed rest, she talked about her very painful illness on Instagram and Patreon. Danielle shared a picture of herself in the hospital on Instagram. She was sitting in a chair that was hooked up to a machine. Even though she was wearing a surgery mask over her face, the star seemed happy. As she waited for her treatment, she held up a Dunkin' drink. She wrote a long blog-like post on Patreon in which she said she was going to have surgery. In her writing, Danielle said that at first it didn't seem like a big deal and she wasn't sure what her diagnosis meant. The History Channel star told her fans that she would do her best to keep them up to date while she was in bed. Thanks for seeing. Before you leave, make sure to subscribe to our channel and watch one of our other fun movies.